I'm going to give a brief overview of 5 games that I've been dabbling with from my Steam library, and I'd venture that almost no one will have heard of any of them. They're all reasonably niche, but that's not to say they're bad. There's a lot of good games here. First up, a game called Ball Blasters. Oh, a parcel for me. Round the back, there's a parcel for me. It's some records. Anyway, first up, Ball Blasters. This is a 2D mining game. You fly around a little gyrocopter, you shoot the right stick and trigger, you blast rocks and ores and gems and enemies, and you attempt to hit the bottom of each dig site to find that stage's treasure. There is an ongoing narrative that details the war between the dwarves, that's your race, with the goblins, and there are goals and missions that are peppered over your runs as well. But the core of the game itself, ignoring any additional story fluff, is just a very, very addictive loop of mining, upgrading, and so you've worked your way across the whole of a big gridded map. Very polished, very addictive, almost feels like playing something like Terraria on fast forward if all the building and crafting was cut out, and instead of a pickaxe, you've got a mounted machine gun. But it's a lot of fun. I don't know how I found this one. I remember actively putting this in my basket and buying it. It wasn't part of a bundle, so I must have found it somehow. But it's really good fun. It's often down to about £2-3. It's worth picking up. Next up, a game called Home is Where One Starts. It's a short narrative adventure, which you can read that as just walking simulator if you want to use that parlance, where you play as a young girl who has missed the bus to school. And as she waits, you as a player are able to piece together the real story of her life through interaction with spaces and places and objects in the surrounding locale of her home. It's about an hour long. It's pretty bleak. I think I can say without spoiling too much that the protagonist doesn't have a great life, but I quite liked the subtle drip of information that comes from a combination of these found objects that you can pick up and manipulate in your hand, and the voiceover text that sort of colours parts of your walk and your exploration of the little area. It's not as poignant as it thinks it is, and the backstory is a little too telegraphed to be particularly impactful. Like, I kind of knew what it was trying to say within 5 minutes, but it's really interesting to see a solo dev take on kind of Dear Esther or Firewatch style design, because obviously they had much bigger teams involved in making those. Just after I finished the game, like I said, it's quite brief, and when I was kind of researching it just to put on my finished log, I realised it was developed by the same person who made a game called The First Tree, which I played a few years ago and talked about in the podcast, but I didn't vibe with it at all. I'd say Home is Where One Starts is more successful than that, even though The First Tree does let you play as a delightful fox, but neither are kind of home runs in the field of narrative adventures. So, this game cost, I think, 50p. So it was certainly worth that, but, is what it is. Next, a game called A Musical Story. This is a supremely cool narrative rhythm game. Big thumbs up for this one. Using just 2 buttons on your pad, you've got a left input and a right input. You have to repeat phrases rhythm Tengoku style to build up a 70s prog and psych rock inspired soundtrack. And it's got beautiful animation. The story is kind of unfolding in the center of the screen in between your kind of inputs. And I've been going for kind of perfect performances on each chapter. And whilst they start off pretty easy in the first few vignettes, just half an hour in, I was having to repeat sections pretty frequently because the game then begins to dabble with slightly more challenging time signatures, and the rhythms I was having to follow started to play with accents and upstrokes and meter, and it's really good. It's really good. My only criticism with this one, and it's a very minor, very personal nitpick, all of the instrumentation sounds like it was recorded live, other than the drums, which are very obviously like sub-garage band quality MIDI. Yeah. And the whole soundscape is so good that it feels really jarring when you've built up these layered, luscious guitar lines, and you've got bass and you've got Rhodes piano, and it's all coming together. And then you drop in this kind of like identikit sounding run of hi-hat and snare. And I don't know, like, was it really outside the scope of the project to just take a session drummer into a studio for an afternoon to depth the parts? Like, it just doesn't seem that big a job. I'm still very keen to grab the soundtrack on vinyl though, because game is really good, and I'm very keen to get through to the end of it. People often say something like Guitar Hero as a console game was the logical lineage of Parappa the Rapper, but I think something like A Musical Story is far closer to that because it's got storytelling in it. The underbelly of Parappa and Jamalami was play a silly song but watch a little silly video at the same time. You're building the story of these characters, and for A Musical Story it's using that same sort of call and response gameplay to actually further a little narrative. It foregrounds the idea of music being able to take you on a journey. So yeah, really, really love this one. Looking forward to finishing off the kind of the back half of it at some point this week. Next up, Bone Marrow. It's a pretty cool little puzzle game meets soft RPG. It initially played this one on the Evercade as it had a modern Mega Drive demake, and it was included on one of the recent Indie Heroes collections. But then I was reasonably unsurprised to find that I also already owned it in my Steam library from its 2020 PC release. Don't know when, don't know how, but it was there. Bone Marrow basically asks, what if Mobile Darling 3s, which was later popularised as the rip-off 2084, what if that was an RPG? Yeah, works pretty well, actually. The game is played in 2 phases. The day phase, where you're moving icons around the board to try and combine swords and shields and healing items to up their value, like doubling each time, as your little player avatar also slides around horizontally and vertically. And then there's the night phase, where enemies spawn. You're able to then collect the icons that you've boosted up. And then if you collide with the enemy, you do battle. So it's basically a fight of attrition then, as you try to keep your health and armor high whilst avoiding accidentally sliding the enemy into the icons that are going to buff their own attack or defense. It's simple, it's pretty effective. It's maybe not that much more than a proof of concept that's spiraled out to be just enough of a game, but it is enjoyable, and it's quite addictive to just find yourself endlessly sliding around and making progress that way. The combat phase feels a little bit awkward because you build up all these icons during the day, and then your player avatars is essentially kind of like getting in the way. Like sometimes you think, well, those two should merge and combine, but then your guy is in the way and they're sort of bouncing off you. So it's not perfect, but it is something that I think is probably worth playing. I don't think it's a bad game at all. It just maybe needed a bit more thought into how to take those mechanics and expand them into, what this game inevitably wishes to be, and obviously wishes to be. Finally, I've been picking through a free puzzle game called 2024 Mosaic Retrospective. And this game takes my favourite mode from DS Puzzler Pick that was on my top 100 list. That was the mode called Magipick, where you needed to use numeric clues to establish which tiles to colour black or white in a small 3x3 grid. And it expands it to be one giant puzzle board. We're talking tens of thousands of squares. And the twist for this particular game is that as certain areas are cleared, you're treated, huge inverted commas here, to summaries of news stories from Year of Our Lord 2024. So we're talking Biden steps down because his brain was broken. Trump wins second term against all odds. Ukraine's still at war. Just awful stuff. And of course, there are some jollier retrospective highlights, in the headlines as well. Some of the more light-hearted things like Mudeng the Pygmy Hippo finds fame, and Charlie XCX releases Brat, which was my de facto album of that year. But all in, I found it impossible not to view the game as a meta-commentary on the relentlessness of the news cycle of 2024, like a seemingly endless puzzle grid to reflect the endless cavalcade of thumbs-down news we had for that whole year. But it's a really good puzzle game, though. And if you don't want to see the bleak 2024 stuff, the developer does have a few paid games in other, more generic fun themes that follow this same format. So, if you want to play that puzzle game, there's other options. But yeah, it's a really cool concept to see this kind of expanded into a much bigger board. It's something that you can do for 5 minutes or 5 hours, depending on how bored you are. And it will probably sit on my deck for quite a while just to pick up when I need to kill 5 minutes or 10 minutes here and there. So yeah, 5 games. You probably haven't heard of any of them, but they're all worth playing in different ways.